A flight attendant bars a passenger from sitting in first class simply because of the color of his skin. However, when he reveals his true identity, she deeply regrets it and, in a desperate gesture, begs for forgiveness on her knees. The story unfolds on a sunny day in the bustling city of Guarulhos. The international airport was bustling with life, as was typical on busy days. In the boarding area, people came and went, families on their way to vacation and professionals in a hurry, all getting ready for their flights. The atmosphere was at its usual frenetic pace, characteristic of a large international hub. Amidst the hurried crowd, a tall, slender man caught the eye as he moved forward with determination. He was pulling a small suitcase with one hand and holding his boarding pass in the other, his eyes alternating between checking the flight information and searching for the correct boarding gate. The airport, a tangle of haste and anxiety, reflected the whirlwind of emotions that were going on inside it. The man, who appeared to be in his 30s, was clearly tired, as if the journey had already been long and tiring. As he finally approached the line to board the first-class flight, the flight attendant, without hesitation, blocked his path based on an unfounded prejudice. What she did not expect was that, upon discovering who he really was, her attitude would change drastically. Her regret was so great that, overcome with guilt, she knelt down to ask for forgiveness. The scene that unfolded next not only shocked those present, but also became a powerful reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that respect should be the rule, not the exception. His previous flight had been significantly delayed, making time his unstoppable enemy. Now he had to hurry to catch his next flight, in a race against time. As he made his way through the airport, the sound of an announcement over the loudspeaker interrupted the constant noise around him. Last call for Flight 3198 to Salvador, the clear, objective voice said. The man's heart raced, and he quickened his pace, aware that this was his last chance to board. His heart was pounding and his breathing became labored as sweat trickled down his forehead, the result of the hurried walk from the international terminal to the domestic terminal, which seemed even longer due to the urgency of the situation. When he finally found the correct boarding gate, he handed his boarding pass and identification to the employee at the counter. She examined the documents with meticulous attention, checking every detail with professionalism. "Mr. Marcos Jose da Silva?" the young woman asked, her voice clear and formal. Marcos nodded, worried that he had arrived too late. "All right, sir. Have a good trip," the employee replied, easing the tension that weighed on him. Happy that he hadn't missed his flight, Marcos just wanted to settle comfortably into his first-class seat and enjoy a well-deserved nap. Marcos was an army captain and had been away from home for months on duty. After having already endured 12 hours of travel on a plane, he still had to face another 2 hours until he finally got home. The only thing he wanted at that moment was a good rest during the flight. Entering the plane, Marcos walked through the aisles, checking his seat number. After putting away his carry-on bag, he made himself comfortable, grabbed a blanket and a sleeping mask, just waiting for takeoff to relax. Suddenly, Marcos noticed one of the flight attendants approaching with a strange expression on her face, a mixture of discomfort and poorly disguised discontent. In a slightly irritated voice, she asked, "Hello, sir, can I help you find your seat?" Confused, Marcos looked at her and then back, believing that perhaps she was talking to someone else. "Are you talking to me?" he asked, still trying to understand the situation. "Yes. Do you need help finding your seat?" the flight attendant insisted in an impatient tone. Marcos blinked a few times, not believing what he was hearing. "But I'm already in my seat," he replied, with incredulity evident in his voice. The flight attendant frowned, and her face took on an air of superiority, unable to hide her growing discomfort. Her prejudiced attitude was evident when, in a thin, firm voice, the flight attendant declared. "I'm sure you don't. Now please stand up. We'll find you a seat in your economy class." Marcos was stunned, struggling to remain calm in the face of the absurd situation. "Excuse me, but this is my seat and I'm not leaving," he protested, his voice firm despite his growing frustration. The flight attendant crossed her arms, and her impatient expression reflected her determination. "Sir, this area is reserved for first-class passengers only. I'm going to have to ask you to stand up and follow me to the economy section. Don't make a fuss." Marcos felt his frustration and discomfort growing, but he struggled to maintain his composure. The situation was becoming increasingly disconcerting, with other passengers casting judgmental glances and whispering among themselves. However, Marcos was not about to give in. In a quick, decisive movement, he firmly stated, "I'm not leaving." The flight attendant, in response, simply gave a mocking smile. "Oh, yes, you will. I'll put you in your place." The question that hung in the air was, why was that flight attendant so determined to demean that man? Why was he being treated so unfairly? To understand what was really happening, we need to know a little more about the story of that flight attendant and the reasons that led her to act in such a discriminatory way. Raquel was an ambitious and petty woman whose life was driven by a constant need for approval and an insatiable desire for status and prestige. This unbridled ambition had deep roots in her humble childhood. Born and raised on a small farm in the countryside of Minas Gerais, Raquel was the eldest daughter of a dedicated farmer who worked tirelessly to support his wife and children. While her younger siblings ran carefree around the farm, Raquel felt a deep hatred for having to help her mother take care of them, instead of enjoying her youth like the city girls. Determined to escape this life of deprivation, Raquel made a promise to herself. As soon as she turned 18, she would leave that isolated farm and try her luck in the big city. Her mind was set on a clear goal, to achieve a status that would make her respected and admired. When she finally moved to the city, she abandoned her humble roots without looking back, breaking all contact with her family. Raquel was determined to transform her life. She soon got a job that helped her pay for an English course and began studying to become a flight attendant. Months of hard work and sacrifice followed, but her determination was unshakable. "No matter what it takes, I'm going to get out of this life," she repeated to herself every night. Finally, after much effort, she graduated and got a job with an airline. She felt that all her hard work had paid off. With a generous salary, Raquel invested in designer clothes, luxurious accessories, and everything of the best, trying to erase any trace of her former life of poverty. She despised her humble origins and began to look down on simple people, as if their social advancement made her superior. Raquel quickly rose through the ranks of the company and soon earned a coveted position, working exclusively with first-class clients. She was used to serving big businessmen, demanding people who exuded wealth and power, exactly the kind of life she had always dreamed of. "Good morning, Mr. Roberto. Black coffee as usual?" she asked the passengers with an impeccable smile. She took pride in her work and the respect she believed she had earned. However, her ambition came at a price. Raquel maintained a cool, superior facade, a shield she used to hide her insecurities and her contempt for her humble origins. "You're wonderful, Raquel. You could be a great businesswoman," a first-class passenger once commented. She smiled politely, but inside, those words only fueled her ego even more. "Thank you, sir. Maybe one day," she replied, maintaining her professional composure but secretly reveling in the idea that she was on the path to becoming someone much greater than her old reality could have predicted. However, the truth was that Raquel could never completely free herself from the memories of her childhood. No matter how hard she tried to ignore the past, memories would sometimes invade her mind when she was alone in her luxurious apartment. At these times, she would be overcome by a mixture of anger and sadness, muttering to herself, "I'll never go back to that life again," as she tried to push away the intrusive thoughts. To compensate for these emotions, Raquel threw herself body and soul into her work, seeking the recognition and validation she never had during her youth. However, this constant search for status ended up making her arrogant and insensitive. She couldn't stand to see people who, in her eyes, didn't belong in the world she had fought so hard to conquer. Her petty personality and air of superiority made Raquel incapable of maintaining lasting relationships, despite her repeated attempts to find true love. The men she got involved with quickly realized the prejudice deeply rooted in her personality. Raquel had a critical eye that turned into a look of disdain whenever she interacted with people who, in her opinion, were not up to her standards. In restaurants, she was the customer who always found something wrong with the service, no matter how hard the waiters tried to please her. Her voice became higher-pitched and colder when she complained, and she often made the waiters visibly uncomfortable with her constant criticism. At home, the situation was no different. Sophia, her maid, a hard-working and dedicated woman, lived under Raquel's constant dissatisfaction. Any small mistake was grounds for a severe reprimand, and Raquel did not spare harsh words when criticizing. This cruel behavior did not go unnoticed by the men who tried to build a relationship with her. They soon realized that Raquel's external beauty was overshadowed by her internal coldness. In the workplace, Raquel's superiority was even more evident. She looked down on the other flight attendants who served economy class, often criticizing their performance and treating them with insufferable condescension. Rachel seemed to believe that her success justified any action she could take, ignoring the impact her actions had on others. Although she had achieved the life she had always dreamed of, the truth was that deep down, Rachel continued to be haunted by insecurities and resentments that no amount of prestige could truly erase. For Raquel, there was a clear distinction between those who served in business class and those who served in economy class. She worked hard to make sure everyone knew exactly where they belonged, according to her own worldview. The men who were involved with Raquel quickly noticed this duality in her personality. At first, they were attracted to her beauty and the confidence she exuded, but over time, the charm wore off, revealing Raquel's true nature. They began to notice how she treated others with coldness and disdain, which inevitably drove them away. Raquel's ability to be kind and affectionate was severely limited by her difficulty seeing others as equals. This toxic dynamic in her relationships contributed to Raquel feeling even more isolated, unable to understand why her attempts to find happiness always ended in failure. In her mind, she saw herself as a victim, convinced that men simply were not capable of appreciating who she really was. What Raquel failed to realize was that her own prejudiced and dismissive attitude was poisoning any chance of building a true relationship. Over time, Raquel closed herself even more in her world of arrogance, convincing herself that it was better to be alone than to be with someone who could not appreciate her supposed superiority. Thus, she continued to follow a lonely path, unable to realize that the true beauty and value of a person lies in the way they treat others, regardless of their position or social status. It was with this thought in mind that Raquel came across Marcos during a flight to Salvador. Upon seeing a black man in first class, her prejudice and arrogance clouded her judgment. She simply could not accept that someone like him could occupy the same space that she considered exclusive. The situation only worsened when Marcos refused to move from his seat, further fueling Raquel's fury, who could not bear to see a man like him enjoying the privileges that she believed were reserved only for people of power. However, Raquel was about to learn a valuable lesson, one for which her ambition and deeply ingrained prejudices had not prepared her. What she did not know was that Marcos was not just another passenger, but a renowned captain in the Brazilian army. This revelation would test all her beliefs, forcing her to confront the limits of her own prejudice and question the true value she placed on status and appearance. For Raquel, the distinction between those who served in business class and those who worked in economy class was non-negotiable. She made sure everyone knew exactly where they belonged in her worldview. Men who approached Raquel quickly noticed this duality in her personality. Initially, they were drawn to her looks and the confidence she radiated. However, as time passed, the charm wore off and Raquel's true nature emerged. They noticed how she treated others with coldness and contempt, which ultimately drove them away. Raquel's ability to be kind and affectionate was severely limited by her inability to see others as equals. This toxic dynamic in her relationships left her feeling even more isolated, unable to understand why her attempts to find happiness always failed. In her mind, she believed that men simply couldn't see her true value. What she didn't realize was that her own judgmental and dismissive attitude was poisoning any chance of building a healthy relationship. Over time, Raquel became even more isolated in her world of arrogance, convincing herself that it was better to be alone than with someone who could not appreciate her supposed superiority. Thus, she followed a lonely path, unable to understand that a person's true beauty and value lie in the way they treat others, regardless of their position or social status. It was with this mindset that Raquel boarded a flight to Salvador. When she saw Marcos, a black man in first class, she was deeply uncomfortable. His prejudice and arrogance quickly clouded her judgment, and she simply could not accept that someone like him could occupy a space that, in her mind, was exclusively for people like her. The situation worsened when Marcos refused to move from his seat, which only fueled Raquel's fury even more, as she could not bear the idea of seeing someone like him enjoying the privileges that she believed were reserved for the few. Raquel was about to receive a lesson that her ambition and deeply ingrained prejudices had not prepared her for. What she did not know was that Marcos was not a simple passenger, but a respected captain in the Brazilian army. That morning, Marcos, who simply wanted a peaceful trip back home, found himself confronted with a prejudice he had never expected to face. As soon as he sat down in his first-class seat, Raquel began to observe him and found it extremely strange. How could a man like him afford a first-class seat? Raquel thought. In her mind, she was sure he was trying to take advantage of an empty seat, hoping no one would notice. Determined to resolve the situation, she approached him while mentally judging him. With those simple clothes, he is definitely in the wrong place, she thought. Marcos, who was no longer on duty, saw no need to travel in his uniform and chose comfortable clothes for the long hours of flight. He was wearing a simple t-shirt, which contrasted with the expensive clothes usually worn by first-class passengers. Raquel, full of arrogance, approached and, already insinuating that Marcos should not be there, asked, "Can I help you find your seat?" She observed Marcos's confused expression while thinking, how shameless. Marcos looked around, still confused, and replied, "I'm already in my seat." Raquel, unable to hide her arrogance and contempt, replied coldly, "I'm sure you're not. Now, please stand up. We'll find your seat in economy class." "Sorry, but this is my seat. I'm not leaving," Marcos protested. Marcos's insistence on not leaving was the last straw for Raquel, who, furious, was determined to get him out of there. The situation escalated quickly, attracting the attention of the other passengers, who now watched the scene with expressions of astonishment and discomfort. The other flight attendants also couldn't hide their reactions, ranging from surprise to attempts to mediate the conflict. Raquel, with her face red with anger and her voice raised, was clearly out of control. The atmosphere on the plane was becoming increasingly tense, and the commotion didn't go unnoticed by the pilot, who was in the cockpit preparing the takeoff procedures. Sensing the gravity of the situation, the pilot decided to leave the cockpit to find out what was happening. As he approached the epicenter of the conflict, he saw Raquel insisting that Marcos leave and go to economy class. But when he saw Marcos, the pilot smiled broadly, immediately recognizing the renowned army captain. "Is that really you, Jonas?" Marcos exclaimed, surprised to recognize the pilot who was approaching with an expression of respect and recognition. The pilot, an old friend of Marcos, smiled warmly and replied, "Yes, it's me. We haven't seen each other since Brasilia, have we? What a coincidence to find you here, my friend." Raquel, who had maintained an attitude of superiority until then, was visibly confused and disconcerted as she observed the interaction between the two. "Sir, do you know this man?" she asked, her voice wavering and full of uncertainty. The pilot, noticing the tension in the air, turned to her and replied firmly, "Yes, I know him very well. This is Captain Marcos José de Silva, one of the most respected officers in our army. He was on an important mission, but now he's returning home." Upon hearing these words, Raquel's face paled and she began to stammer, unable to hide the regret she felt. I didn't know. I'm sorry, sir. I really didn't know." With a more serious expression, the pilot turned to Raquel, calmly reprimanding her. "Your attitude was completely inappropriate. Even if Marcos wasn't in the correct seat, that wouldn't justify your rudeness. Apologize to him now." Raquel, now embarrassed and remorseful, looked at Marcos humbly. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry for my attitude." Marcos, still processing the turn of events, just nodded, trying to minimize the situation. "I just want to take a nap and get home safely," he said, trying to ease the tension. The pilot then turned to the passengers who were still watching the scene, and with a firm but conciliatory tone, declared, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, passengers. The situation has been resolved. Please make yourselves comfortable so we can ensure a smooth flight." The passengers, still murmuring among themselves, gradually went back to their activities, while the pilot gave Marcos one last apologetic look before returning to the cockpit. Raquel, shaken and humiliated, retreated to a corner, knowing that she would have to face the consequences of her actions. Marcos settled back into his seat, trying to forget the incident. He grabbed his blanket and sleeping mask, hoping to finally be able to rest. However, deep down, he knew that what had happened was a reflection of something bigger. Raquel's prejudice and arrogance were not just individual problems, but symptoms of a society that still had a lot to learn about equality and respect. As the plane finally took off, Marcos felt a deep sense of gratitude for the support he had received from the pilot. He reflected on the hope that in the future, people could be more inclusive and respectful of one another. The journey continued, but the impact of what had happened would leave a lasting mark on everyone involved, especially Raquel. She would have to face and reevaluate her own attitudes and decisions from that moment on. Raquel's attitude did not go unnoticed by the company she worked for. After a consultation with the pilot himself, the company made the decision to fire her, forcing Raquel to deal with the consequences of her arrogance and prejudice. All the effort she had put into her career seemed to unravel before her eyes, but at the same time, it served as a valuable lesson. Raquel learned that true growth comes from confronting our flaws and continually striving to improve ourselves. Although the issues involving Raquel had been resolved, Marcos knew that the incident would leave a scar. Still, he was not shaken by the ignorant attitude of others. As a renowned captain, Marcos was prepared to face any obstacle that life presented him, maintaining dignity and respect for everyone around him. This story served as a lesson to many who are quick to judge others, revealing that the real problem often lies within our own hearts. The message was clear. We must always choose love and kindness, treating everyone with the respect and dignity they deserve, regardless of their appearance or social status. If this story touched you, the next video that is appearing on your screen will certainly move you too. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. A big kiss and see you in the next exciting story.